The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Eamon, it's my lucky day because you're going to explain to me what. Let me try and let's actually have a bit of a tongue tie with this. Chop shops and boom boom bars.
Chop shops and boom boom bars. Yeah, it came up at the recent Criminal Assets Bureau hearing, and all relates to a gentleman called Blondie Stokes, who I suppose he was described as a leading figure in an organised crime gang. So his boom boom bar was the 400 grand's worth of an extension, or was part of the 400 grand he spent on his house in Longford, which he bought for something like 12,000 or 25,000. I forget the exact figure. And
so did you knock it and just rebuild a whole new
No,
house?
he just kept adding, and apparently it was quite nicely done. Joe Jones said he was looking at the pictures. Now I didn't get to see them, and he says it's very well appointed, and it seemed to show great taste. He was very impressed with Blondie's Boom Boom Bar, which was apparently how it was termed locally.
This was how the house was, not there wasn't a bar.
No, the actual
back,
this is the actual bar at the back. It was a separate extension, which was apparently nothing much to look at from the outside, but exquisitely equipped on the inside. So the money that he made from his chop shops wasn't wasted.
Right. And the Boom Boom Bar was to entertain his own personal guests and all the rest of it.
Presumably so,
Some people
to hang out.
Sheds during COVID, didn't they, for that? And
yeah, I think it's pretty much along the lines, it was like your beer tap in your garden shed with your two friends.
Yeah.
And sitting there till 4 in the morning.
When you think of that,
I kind of miss it now.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, the chop shop afforded him this luxury bar at the back of the house. So what is this chop shop? I know I'm going to mispronounce that.
Look, chop shop, if you watched even Starsky and Hutch back in the 70s, there was always a chop shop somewhere in each episode, and it's basically where stolen cars are brought and taken apart or, sold on or modified. And nowadays it's a matter of getting them and seeing if they can quickly, neutralize the satellite tracking, which I don't think they can really do in a lot of, the high-end modern cars. But generally, they're stripped and the parts are packaged up, usually into shipping containers, and off they go to Eastern Europe, to parts of Africa. I mean, in some cases, it's not even expensive cars. Sometimes you're talking about, really basic models of vans. Even 15-year-old vans are being chopped up and shipped out in maritime containers to West Africa, where they get where it's worth somebody.
It sounds like a lot of work for a criminal organisation to be bothered with these days.
Yeah, and what Blondie and his uncle Sonny Stokes did was they were at the higher end of the market. They weren't stealing like the cheap cars. They were going for the plant hire machinery. They were these is like the Caterpillar diggers on JCBs, mini diggers, this sort of thing. Which go for they're not cheap. I mean, they go for hundreds of thousands of euro. This kind of machinery and
sold back into what the proper legitimate industry. Obviously,
some of them would be remodeled. Some of them would be taken apart for their parts, and then they would be sold separately. For fear that that in the actual structure of the machines there would be satellite planting, because there is. I spoke to somebody who was involved as a private investigator years ago, and he was hoping to win a contract for a particularly large plant machinery manufacturer to go and check out when they would get a ping saying, your Caterpillar that was stolen in Western Germany has turned up in Mayo. Can you go and find out what's going on there? And is there any chance of his getting it back? I don't know if you remember, even at the start of the war in Ukraine, when the Russians invaded, they were looting as much as they could, and a number of John Deere tractors were tracked all the way back to Russia. And as soon as they got there, I think the American company were able to switch them off so the engines wouldn't start again. So they got a chassis and 4 wheels, but that's about it. So I mean, yeah, they can do all that now. So I mean, like in terms of what was going on here, like the kind of, I suppose the period of activity that the Criminal Assets Bureau were focusing on was from 2015 to 2020. And when they raided the chop shops, and there was 2 of them in Longford, they added up to about €670,000 worth of stolen machine parts and machines. And they meticulously tracked each one of these down to the thefts, where they happened, and kind of went through it laboriously.
Yeah.
This one was in whatever part of County Surrey and this one in another part. So it gives you an insight into the real kind of, I suppose, the network and, and just how these machines are kind of rebirthed, they're given new identities. And that was the work that was going on in these chop shops. So presumably, there was specialist people hired by the gang who would come in and do this. They'd have, skilled mechanics, people with good knowledge. I mean, other case I've done on these in the past, it's generally been Eastern European guys that they seem to be well ahead of it.
It sounds like sort of nearly old school stuff.
Yeah.
Is it kind of finding it's not got a future?
I would imagine it's getting trickier.
Yeah.
Especially because, like tracking devices is so cheap now. So I mean, and if you're gonna invest 500,000 in a particular size of a digger or bulldozer, or more, you're going to put this stuff in it because it's worth your while. Like, you're probably not going to get insured. And this stuff is welded in at the manufacturing basis, at the manufacturing point.
So really difficult
so
to
like,
out.
and they'll change the points where they do it, and I don't know how detectable they are. I mean, they can probably neutralize them while they're stationary in a building for a while, by just, by putting them in a Faraday cage or whatever, just to block the signal. But once they move it, it'll light up again. Now, it's not going to light up in the local Garda station. You'll have a couple of days or weeks before the manufacturers get around to alerting somebody, unless there's already a live investigation for some reason, if perhaps somebody was accidentally killed or something in the theft of a particular machine. But otherwise, like, there's... I can't see.
And are they also stealing kind of cars to order for robberies and stuff like that? Could you have gone to them for supply of...
No, there was no suggestion of that with the Stokes gang.
Yeah.
Now, they did seem to have a lot of cars on their different lots over the years, because I think some of our colleagues had been down speaking to Sonny at one point after a big raid in 2016, in which he denied any involvement in crime and was suggesting that he was the victim of jealous rivals who didn't like the fact that he was undercutting them.
Right.
And he was blaming, this jealousy for the reason for it. But of course, then in the evidence in the High Court recently, he was specifically named as the leader of the Stokes OCG, and that he was very much in cahoots with his nephew, Blondie Stokes, also both called Edward. Like, Blondie is serving time for a pretty nasty assault on a guy in a pub, and his uncle was with him at the time. There was, I think, a man from a farming background was in a pub. I think there may have been some kind of business in the past between them. And he went into the pub armed with some kind of an implement, and they gave him a savage beating. And they left I think there was a grandchild or a child was left to keep view. And this is all caught on CCTV. And they Blondie pretty much went at it. And he was charged with violent affray, because they couldn't charge him with assault because the victim didn't make a statement and wouldn't make a statement. And so it was all the CCTV that convicted him. And he originally got, I think, 2.5 years or 3 years, but the DPP appealed that, and it was up to 7.5. So that's where he is. That's where he is at the minute. And
hefty enough sentence.
Yeah.
So are they in this business for decades? Do they have this sort of, this chop shop industry going? I mean, that they have business partners as such, because the people buying them are in far-flung places, and they're using shipping to get once these machines are chopped up, essentially, they're obviously using some sort of legitimate shipping and transport industries, and their buyers are established in all corners of the globe.
Yeah, I mean, from what we know from the evidence in this case, like they just stuck with a 5-year period, and they didn't say anything before or after, like 2015 to 2020. I mean, chop shops have been around for years and years, and probably there was one in every town at one stage, I'm sure. Whereas now it's more of a very niche kind of criminal area now. But like, in terms of what the Stokes OCG were doing, it was sophisticated, and they were dealing with people in the UK. Presumably, there was a variety of people stealing this type of machinery. You're going to need machines to steal machines. You're going to need trailers. You're going to need trucks, and you're going to need to do at least a basic kind of changing of the ID to get them into Ireland. Presumably on the ferry through Northern Ireland or from Wales or whatever. So I mean, it shows.
You need some papers, do you, to show what you need them for?
Well, it's a free travel area, so unless you're stopped. But yeah, I mean, you technically you would need to be able to show, like, I mean, anywhere if a guard stopped you, like explain yourself. Yeah, but the chances are they wouldn't be. And if it meant leaving something behind to get away, I'm sure they would. I'm sure that's been done as well. But there is definitely a degree of sophistication, and they would have been, doing deals, whether they were buying the machines to order or they were buying them from, I don't know, I guess a fence, or they were being reckless as to the origin of these vehicles and pretending that they didn't know where they came from. But then why would you bring them to a chop shop, So, but they were rebirthing them themselves for resale. So
and were they mostly from the UK?
All of the ones that were dealing with this, they appear to be from the UK.
So it seems kind of clunky to have to transport them across the sea by ferry into Ireland. Why would they not have established their chop shop in the UK? Is it better to move the?
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, because if you're going to have to deal with a manufacturer to try and track your piece of machinery, and it goes into another jurisdiction, it's another obstacle. It's another little barrier, I suppose, someone's going to have to get around, especially as a civilian investigator or somebody from an insurance company. They're kind of going, well, it's out of the country. We can't really do anything else now. And that, unfortunately, that's, the limit of their power. So unless the police were actively going after it, they wouldn't be, they wouldn't necessarily be able to get this information quickly. But it was interesting that they went through CAB to prove that all these €670,000 worth of parts in the two different workshops. We'll stop saying chop shop just to give you a break.
Okay, thanks.
But that they were, they linked them directly back to specific crimes, just to show that all this money that went into the boom boom bar, and the whatever. I think the money in the credit union that was found, it was €72,000 in a credit union as well. So all of that they wanted to show came from actual criminal acts. So
that's not unlike the way they approached the Byrne organised crime gang when they were investigating them, because they home in on cars, and the cars they seized from Liam Byrne's LS Active car sales, and they were able to track back each car, where it came from, who was driving it, because they were trying to prove that these cars were essentially currency within the criminal organisation. But a lot of their investigations was actually on the vehicle and where it had been and where it had come from.
I suppose it was a different emphasis in that sense. Because the cars themselves were legit. They weren't stolen.
Yeah.
They were bought, most of them I think were bought at auction. And the whole idea was then that you bring them to Ireland, and then you sell them, and then the cash from your sale in Ireland is suddenly supposedly clean money. In theory, that should work unless the police go to the trouble of going back to where was it sold, and going to the auction houses in England, say, or asking the police in England to say, can you find out, who bought this? Where did they get the money? And that was the whole point. Plus then, I suppose you want to show association. If you've got 10 different members of a known criminal organisation and they're nipping in and out every day to LS Motors to pick up a different car and drop one back, and, and turning up later and going off in a smaller, kind of a nondescript vehicle, and then coming back for the flash one a day or two later, and all that, it all adds up to a kind of a picture where you're able to put it in front of a judge in a proceeds of crime case to say, look, this isn't normal behaviour. This isn't what cars do. And there was an element of that with Bone Motors as well. We saw that with the Limerick gangs, where it was kind of very much seen as certain individuals who were able to use it as, a kind of a free car rental. They could nip in any time and drive away with their car of their choice.
So what was he spending his money on, Blondie Stokes? And indeed his uncle, who was named, of course, in the CAB case.
Yeah, well, he was named, but he wasn't a target.
He wasn't a target, but he was named as kind of a leading member of the organisation.
Yeah, he was, and it was all part of the case against Blondie Stokes to show that he was involved in crime, that, his uncle was involved this way. But his wife as well, Sharon.
Yeah.
So Blondie and Sharon, they had 72,000 in credit union accounts, and their house was declared the proceeds of crime. But there was also, I suppose, what a good one was that they didn't find them, but there was two Rolex watches bought in Weirs in Grafton Street. One of, I think it was 14,400, and then another one for the same price a month later. Right. So that's where 28,800 went anyway on two watches. So
I had the receipts for that.
Well, they were able to track. They knew that they had been bought. Yeah. Because I think once you're spending that kind of money, you have to fill out a form. You have to declare it. So they were able to track it through, I guess, whatever system is used when people are spending more than the amount, was around 10,000 or something like that. Now, they were both separately represented, Sharon and Blondie. And Blondie's counsel, was trying to suggest he was trying to say, look, saying there isn't a lot to this case, really. In fairness, he said, look, I mean, like if the watches are so important, why aren't CAB trying to seize them as well? To which Judge Owen replies, well, I'm sure they would if they found them. Yeah. So that was kind of he was on a hiding to nothing, I'm afraid, that counsel. He bravely battled on.
Yeah.
But
some of them do. You feel sorry for them.
He lost. I don't feel sorry for them at all. He got free legal aid for the case.
He got paid at least.
Well, he got half a free legal aid.
Sometimes when they're trying to argue the unarguable.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, and Sharon did get, I think, something like 12,900 back from that account because she had there was a legitimate insurance payout that she got.
Right.
So
that came back
she didn't lose anything. So that'll go back to her, presumably.
But the house?
The house was all declared the proceeds of crime, and so that's going to be sorted out at another hearing later down. I mean, what they've done in usually these cases is they'll say, well, they're going to have to leave by usually kind of August, because that gives them chance to set up, and if they have to move and the kids have to go to a different school, they can find somewhere for them. Now, like, I mean, some of the Stokes, Blondie and Sharon's circumstances came out, and that they had 7 children, 5 of whom are autistic. And so this was all kind of used in, kind of saying, well, you can't kick them out of the family house, but it's this type of mitigation you normally hear in a criminal case, but because this is a civil case, it doesn't really cut the same ice, But they haven't. There's been no definite date set as yet that she has to get out. And then Blondie, in the meantime, of course, in Castlereagh prison, so he's not going to be without shelter.
That's a big loss.
Oh no, it is. Yeah, and I mean,
it's a big loss to them. Like, their home. Yeah,
their home, and your boom boom bar is all about status and a symbol, and and wearing your Rolexes. It's all about that. So I mean, it is going to hurt. It's a bit of an ouch for him, to say the least. Even if he does have money somewhere stashed, or he may or may not. I mean, like, some of these guys are very clever and are able to salt away their money. We know that from other cases, people who have, they've been wrapped up by CAB in this country, but it's known that they own property in Turkey or in other jurisdictions that they can't be reached. So presumably some of the cash has gone that way as well. So you can only assume that some of these guys are smart enough; they'll have something left when he gets out of prison.
Some of these guys, when it comes to the family home, especially in a case where you might have a wife and 7 children outside, you're in jail, they will sort of come to the table and try and settle in order to give up enough that will allow them keep the home as such. In this case, if, for example, the wife and 7 children have nowhere to go, is the state going to have to step in there?
Quite possibly. I mean, and generally, like, it's kind of been I suppose, a tenet of Irish law that the family home is sacred, and you see it in kind of mortgage cases, and where people have defaulted, and somebody's saying, well, we've tried, we've made an effort to pay for the house, and it's the family home, and you can't kick us out. And it's very difficult in this country to evict somebody from their family home. It's a more straightforward process if it's an investment house, or if if somebody's a tenant or whatever. But or if they have more than one property, again, there's kind of no onus on the state then to kind of leave them there. Otherwise, it does. It switches to the state to housing. People have a right to housing.
And perhaps if the decision hasn't fully been made, although it's been declared the proceeds of crime, there might be still an opportunity for some talks to get underway there.
Yeah, and of course there would be, but once it's the proceeds of crime, that's it. There's no going back.
Yeah.
I mean, the house is going to get sold by CAB.
So they should at some point come to the table at some stage during these.
Well, there was a lot of It took a long time. Like, and it was used. Though, well, the fact our client is in prison is making it very hard to contact him and take instruction. There was a lot of changing of lawyers. I remember in the early cases, and CAB were constantly pushing, saying, we haven't got replying affidavits yet. So they were constantly pushing for the hearing, and there was an attempt to kind of push it back again to get more information, and there was all these delay going on, and CAB won the argument, saying, no, we got to go ahead, and there's been plenty of undertakings previously made, and it hasn't happened. So. They managed to hurry it on.
As we know, doesn't take any prisoners in these kind of cases.
No, he goes.
I think he's fair. He kind of gives them a lot of opportunities.
No, he does, and I suppose he doesn't want to give anyone grounds for appeal. Like, I suppose that's a sign of any professional judge nowadays is kind of conscious of that. And that's why even in criminal cases now you hear them, it's a relatively new practice now where they read out in detail the reasoning behind why they're coming up with a certain length of time for a sentence, including all the mitigation. So they're kind of going through all the different stages, all the different, I suppose, potential grounds for appeal and kind of ticking them off as they go. So, I mean, in some senses, like Judge Owens would be doing that. He'd be giving them enough leeway to make their point so that they can't go later and argue we weren't allowed to make this point. And it doesn't necessarily go the way they expected. Just because you're allowed to make the application doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go your way.
It feels like the group would have had quite a lot of skill set around machinery maybe, and probably there are legitimate reasons for breaking up machines too, especially now with the recycling industry the way it is, etc. Had they perhaps put their skills to more legitimate machinery breaking or chopping, they mightn't be in the position of being evicted from their family home at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's, I'm sure there's plenty of legitimate business out there running, plant hire and sales and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So, and they're big machines and they're expensive and there's demand for them when there's a lot of building going on and a lot of that kind of infrastructural work that we see, where streets have been dug up. So, I mean, yeah, why not? I mean, you do wonder why some people, waste their time going into an illegitimate game rather than just...
For a quick buck, but no long-term gain, really.
Nothing much to it, like in the end, they've very little to show for it.
Well, maybe...
Not as much fun, I'd imagine.
But probably not. But maybe the moral of the chop shop story is that... this kind of criminal industry remains back in the days of Starsky and Hutch and has no place in the modern world. Thanks, Eamon.
It's always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.